Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm the National Convener of the Australian Home Birth Network Joyous Birth for the last nearly 20 years, and I have been a very angry feminist activist for about 30-something years now. I've been addressing rallies and conferences on this topic for a few years now, and have watched the progress of medicalising children with great alarm. We have not yet come to the depths of what will be achieved by the activist doctors in Australia. They still basically have free rein. The propaganda which promotes the wrong body narrative is being given to younger and younger children, preschoolers to primary-aged kids, via our national broadcaster and many other media outlets. It is undeniable, except by those with a vested interest, that children are being recruited to justify and normalise the existence of autogynephilic males, to retrospectively provide these men with an imaginary pathway from childhood which seeks to naturalise their fetishised public demonstrations. The only glimpse of hope on the horizon in the courts is a recent case where parents agreed not to deny their child a normal puberty, and the interesting public comments made by their solicitor may indicate some light being shone in the dark places of these clinics at last. You will notice that every story intended to convince us of the existence of children in the imaginary category called trans starts with a statement about the child failing to embrace sex stereotypes forced upon it by adults. While this should be completely unremarkable, since sex stereotypes have long been recognised as harmful, for a disturbingly large group of people, this can now result in medicalising a child and preventing their sexual and psychological maturation. Agents which can suppress puberty are originally intended for use by adult women to manage symptoms of endometriosis and fibroids. They are employed in adult males to suppress hormones while managing advanced prostate cancer, but also as the colloquially named chemical castration in sex offenders. They are used on occasion for the rare medical issue of precocious puberty in very young children. They have never been licensed for use as suppressing agents in adolescents to indefinitely prevent normal puberty, and the full effects of this iatrogenic process are not explained to families or the child involved. As Michael Biggs noted in 2022, the original study used to normalise puberty suppression in physically healthy adolescents, the so-called Dutch protocol, was based on only 70 adolescents and has proven to be a baseless rationale for the notions it's used to justify. While the doublespeak of the activists tries to portray preventing puberty as temporary, a pause button, or somehow psychologically therapeutic, the actual effect of this is to sterilise the child. Puberty performs many functions in humans, though the primary function is to begin the process of sexual maturation and fertility. Preventing puberty results in a child who never reaches this stage of normal human development. There simply is no good reason to promote the sterilisation of kids, many of whom are autistic, victims of trauma and bullying, or would likely grow up to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual. No child is born in the wrong body. To borrow from Michel Audin, this is a diagnosis in search of a disease. All over the world, the same bad medicine has been used to justify this iatrogenic process. The Dutch protocol was financed by Ferring, the company which makes triptorelin. Triptorelin is commonly used to prevent puberty in Australian children to this day. To our eyes now, with the benefit of hindsight, the Dutch protocol could appear conservative. They only prevented puberty in 7 children under the age of 16 by the year 2000. Today, children as young as 9 are started on these drugs. We know that 96 to 98% of children in whom puberty is prevented go on to receive artificial hormones. This is a cascade of interventions ranging from the initial social transition of pretending the child is the opposite sex, all the way through to castration, double mastectomy and hysterectomy. By 1999, the promoters of the idea in gender identity in children knew that most would outgrow it and be lesbian, gay or bisexual. They just began leaving that information out over time, so the current invention of the trans child became possible. Of the 70 minors in the Dutch protocol study, 62 were same-sex attracted. 1 was heterosexual. The same doctor who recommended preventing puberty in these teens also recommended the same drugs for males with persistent sexual obsessions and paraphilias, though with the proviso that it may prove very uncomfortable owing to side effects. He did not make this warning for the adolescents. Men being chemically castrated are typically on these drugs for less time than young children due to human rights and health concerns. We never hear the full reality of the Dutch protocol. 8 patients refused to participate in the final review or were ineligible for the surgeries performed upon the others. 1 died from necrotising fasciitis because, as we saw with Jazz Jennings, suppression of normal puberty led to his penis remaining the size of a small child's. So the surgeons used some of his intestine, which became seriously infected and killed him. There was follow-up from this cohort of a 35-year-old woman described as not regretting her bodily alterations, but also still scoring very high on a test for depression and being unable to sustain an intimate relationship owing to shame and embarrassment at the state of her genitals. Questioned again at 48, her life had improved and she was maintaining a relationship with another woman. But at what cost, since this is obviously despite the alterations to her mind and body? It is of considerable concern that we have no real way of measuring the numbers of children in Australia who are being given puberty-suppressing agents and then moving to opposite-sex hormones. The gender clinics do not record what happens to the kids who reach the age of 18 in their service, and those moving on to hormones are routinely referred to private endocrinologists whose books are not available to us via FOI. Diana Kenny noted in her empirical data collection covering 2014 to 2019 that numbers of children having puberty suppressed continues to grow before they're lost to the wild west of prescribing of private endocrinologists. Queensland figures are particularly stark, 6 times higher, in fact, than the nearest similar state, with significantly more children enrolled than other states, even the more populous New South Wales. Given that we know suppressing puberty is the first chemical step in the cascade of intervention towards genital surgeries, this is deeply concerning. We really need whistleblowers in Australia from clinics and private offices. So it is perhaps not insignificant that one of the more publicly discussed cases of a child having puberty suppressed comes from Queensland in 2022. A teenager the judgment describes as, quote, born what would commonly be referred to as female, but identifies as male, end quote. In this case, Gillick competence was again a focus, given that it is one of the legal tests for whether a child is mature enough to consent to a medical treatment. What I have often suggested is that believing one is the opposite sex in the face of evidence to the contrary should manifest in a finding of incompetence. This judgment, however, relates the girl's reported persistence in her belief as the basis for her competence. It is also noted that the girl is on the autism spectrum, and in a flash of commendable insight, she wondered herself if she may feel dislocated from her body as a result. But the judgment makes no comment other than to relate this. Curious. Given the circular nature of this diagnosis in search of a disease, it comes as no surprise that the child is described as, and this is a quote, I don't want anyone to think I would ever write this sentence, medical practitioners in a way which is consistent with the conclusion that the child has a considered understanding of what it means to feel like the child feels and why it is that the child wants to have this treatment. The frightening aspect of this case, it's not the only one, is the judge's decision to invoke the parens patriae power of the court. Coming to us from 1,000 years of jurisprudence, parens patriae is part of equitable jurisdiction and exercised by judges of the Supreme Courts. It is a far-reaching, potentially limitless power which provides the court with greater power even than parents. It can be invoked in matters relating to education, indefinite protective detention, surgical procedures, abortion, involuntary hospitalisation and more besides. It is intended to be exercised only in exceptional cases. And it is intended to be weighed against the liberty of the child in question, resulting in the greater onus on the court to exercise caution. In this case, the child's father opposes medicalising her and the mother supports it. So the court, in invoking this jurisdiction, clearly disregards the father's view and supersedes the mother's by supporting her wishes but giving a far more powerful voice to them. If greater caution is supposed to be exercised when a child's liberty is at stake, it seems curious to condemn a child to lifelong medical captivity for the sake of an ideology. As I mentioned earlier, we do have one blip in the seamless progression by activists intent on removing parental responsibility and condemning children to needless medicalisation. A case we assume is in Victoria, but only from the presence of a Victorian solicitor, apparently had the most lengthy and balanced discussion of puberty suppressing agents thus far in any case. The case of Re-Imogen in 2019, a mother attempted to introduce expert evidence on the harm of ideological iatrogenic interventions, but was largely prevented. The sources promoting the harm outnumbered her witnesses by 10 to 1. But in the recent case, not only was there genuine evidence provided and seen by the court, the parents eventually came to an agreement that the child's development was to be left intact until at least the age of 16. Given that we know puberty is the cure for most children who experience a sense of dislocation from their normal bodies, this child has more of a chance at reaching adulthood with an intact body than most. Provide some hope to other parents struggling with the reach of this cult and the deep pockets of the activist lawyers that a child might yet go through legal proceedings and be provided a rational outcome. Another positive step has been brought to my attention only this morning. There is to be a meeting of Headspace staff, including concerned parents about gender medicine and the push to medicalise children. GP Dr. Tyler Schofield in Newcastle is seeking submissions from parents and children harmed by GPs or others under the auspices of this government-funded body. Please contact him if your child fits this description. Management is also keen to hear from you. All the challenges the gender identity industry poses to our society are frightening. We are being forced to accept fraudulent government papers as normal. We are being told that refusing to admit men to women's single-sex spaces is violent bigotry. We are being told that we must pretend some babies are being born to men. And we are being asked to believe that some children are a special category to whom lifelong medicalisation, sterilisation, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis and restricted brain maturation is preferable to them simply growing up within the normal parameters of human development. These children are being sterilised and mutilated. They are being surgically and psychologically harmed. Every opportunity you get to tell someone who doesn't yet realise what this actually means, you should grab it. Speak up for these kids, because so far most doctors and politicians are either too scared or just as culpable in this medical scandal as the activist doctors and judges. Thank you.